So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we meet tonight on the traditional owners of the Bungala people and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to just do a couple of welcomes and a couple of apologies. So I'll start with the welcome. So we have in the room a number of councillors, probably to everyone in the room you'll know them, but councillors, if you can just put your hand up. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 councillors in the room. We do have an apology from Mayor McLaughlin, whose mother passed away on the weekend, and Councillor David Knox, who is travelling at present. So that's the apologies. The welcomes now. Did the welcomes for the councillors. Council staff, if I can just get you to put your hands up. So we've got Grant, Kristen, Sandra, Kathy and Jade, Brian and myself. So those of you who haven't met yet, my name's Justin Commons, and it's my role tonight to present some information to you and to get some feedback from you regarding the draft annual business plan and budget. Grants, if I can get you to go to the next slide. Also just wanted to say that tonight we're going to be recording tonight's session. I'm not sure how the audio and visual will look, so if it looks and sounds okay without things like that happening, we will look to put the video of tonight's consultation evening up onto our website. So if you know family or friends who are not able to come in person but can be able to hear what is being proposed for next year, this might be an extra way that we can provide that access to that information. So tonight, just a quick run sheet in terms of the format for tonight. This is our agenda. So we're going to do initially at a glance our city, the services that council provides, and what some of our projects and priorities and achievements have been in recent times. We'll then look at what are the opportunities and challenges ahead, and we'll touch on a few things such as hydrogen and the livability and vision for our city. Importantly is the funding for our future, and what is the makeup of council's revenue base and how do we look to fund our operations and service delivery over the 10-year period of our long-term financial plan. We'll touch on the subject of rate reliefs, provide a little bit more context in terms of the consultation opportunities and ability for community to contribute to the conversation, and then questions and answers at the end. Before we kick into the information, any questions about that before we launch into it? If not, I'll keep moving. So our city, all of you in this room have lived in the city, and many of you have lived in the city for a long time, so you'll know fully, where we are and some information about our demographics. So you'll know that we have nearly 11,000 odd dwellings. We have a population base of about 22,000 people at present. We have lots of sunshine and some other information there, which and these slides will be up on the website if you want to have a look at them. Turn to the next slide. The annual business plan, draft annual business plan that's been prepared, has been prepared on the basis that it's essentially a business as usual budget. So we're looking to continue to deliver the same services and the same service levels that we have in recent times. And again, for the benefit of our community, we've provided this infographic that just shows just some of the services that we provide. We probably provide in excess of probably 50 different services when you actually break it down. And a lot of the services are the traditional core services of council, and everyone knows the old adage of rates, roads and rubbish, the 3 Rs. But in these days, councils provide much more than just those traditional services. And like many councils today, councils provide things like libraries, visitor information centres. We maintain open spaces, parks and gardens, maintain roads and the like. But what is unique about Whyalla in our context is that we do have some additional services that are not provided by all other councils, and for that matter, not some councils, not many councils provide, for example, a regional airport. We also have an accredited visitor information centre. We have a childcare service that we provide to our community. We have a number of key public infrastructure assets such as our jetty. So we do all of the regular stuff that you expect from most councils, but we then do have some additional unique services. Next slide, please. So importantly, and I emphasise again, this is essentially a business as usual budget. There's not too many frills in terms of major projects or major initiatives that we're looking to fund in this year's budget. It is very much about the core services that you'll be familiar with. So there's the open spaces, parks and gardens, median strips, sporting facilities, footpaths and bikeways. Next slide, please. Again, some more open spaces, street tree maintenance, picnic shelters, roads, footpaths, verges, and the like. Library services, community arts, and maintaining and protecting the natural environment. And I'll just quickly put in the plug because it's always a topical subject. That thing that you see on the sand is not weed, it's seaweed, and it's really important in terms of the the environmental sustainability of the natural beach dune environment. Next slide, please. This slide you won't be able to see, apologise in advance, but the purpose of this slide, and there's a copy of this page over on the desk at the back, is we quite often get asked the question by the community, what do we get from council for the rates that we pay? And two things to note on that. This provides a list of the various services that we provide. And for an average residential rate payer that pays in the order of about $1,700 of rates per year as their rates contribution to the city, you can see the services that we provide. And this is not an exhaustive list, it's just an indication. So everything from waste management, open spaces, through to sports and recreation facilities, tourism and events, visitor information centres, community development, economic development, and the list goes on. And so I encourage you to have a look at that list. The key message here is that council does provide a significant suite of different services. And the second key point is that rates are a form of taxation. They're not a fee for service. So for some people, they might say, well, I don't want $1,700 of my rates paid going towards, say, for example, childcare, because I don't have children. I don't use the childcare service, but as a form of taxation and as a means to funding the provision of local government services, what we collect in rates is then to deliver goods and services and facilities to support our community. So every person who contributes rates is actually contributing to the broader services and infrastructure maintained and supported by council. Next slide, please. So if we look at over the last 12 months, where some of our key focus areas and priorities and achievements are, again, just a quick snapshot of a few of those. Back in December, council adopted the Foreshore Master Plan after significant consultation. I think we had in excess of 4,000 contributions from different community members and business members and other key stakeholders as part of that consultation process. So very robust process to develop that master plan. We, with support from the state government, are investing $4 million into the Northern Coastline and Cuttlefish Sanctuary project. So that $4 million with $2 million coming from the state government, one of the largest state government contributions as part of the COVID stimulus package, will go towards formalisation of a number of campsites along the northern coastline, formalisation, including not only designating certain areas, but actually putting additional facilities and amenities into a number of those locations. So we're looking at putting toilets in, shelters, picnic benches, in some locations, barbecues, barbecues, Wi-Fi connectivity and the like. So we part of the project is about trying to encourage campers to use designated areas as opposed to basically, going wherever they want to go and driving all over land that we know is of cultural significance to our Bungala traditional owners. In addition to that, there's also the upgrade of the Point Lowly cottages, which are currently closed because they need a major refurbishment, as well as an investment into the cuttlefish dive area down near the Santos facility. So we're looking at putting a sealed road into that area, some additional amenities, including toilets, car parking, more car parking, signage and the like. So ultimately, that project is looking at not only providing an improved visitor experience for people that may come to visit our area and camp along that area, but also improved amenities for our locals that also enjoy that part of our area. We've got activations in train, and I apologise also in advance. I've got a little bit of a cough, but I'm not COVID positive. It's just the tail end of man flu, and yes, it was man flu, not just normal flu. So periodically I have a bit of a cough, so I apologise about that. We've got various activations, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but we know that there's a lot of community facilities that are owned and maintained by council that require significant investment. And when you put all of that investment together, it's beyond the capacity of our community to fund that level of investment in the short term. So we are looking at using some pod activations to provide a means to provide some community facilities until we can get some of that new development to come online, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. The upgrade of Bennett Oval a couple of years ago, we won an award last year for the thing that was the best AFL facility in the state or outside of Metro Adelaide. And whilst that in itself is a great accolade of the quality of the redevelopment that occurred, what is important is that facility is now able to be used to host, AFL pre-season games, or in July this year, an SANFL game and the Country Football Carnival. So we'll have about 400 to 500 people coming into our city on the 16th and 17th of July for that weekend of SANFL and country football, which is obviously a huge injection of investment into our city. So all the hotels and accommodation and food house and beverage places should be absolutely packed that weekend, which will be great, and we're looking forward to it. Next slide. The Recreation and Leisure Centre. Anyone who's been to that facility in recent times will know that some of the services within the facility we've had to close down or shut down on the basis that some of the equipment and the plumbing and the like has got to the point where we do need to start making a significant investment into that building. Over the last, I'm not sure how long it's been, 9 to 12 months, we've been doing a master plan to inform the future decisions around that centre. And we know that to do an upgrade of that facility is probably going to cost in the order of about $17 million based on the master plan cost estimates. So we don't have $17 million sitting in the bank at this point in time. But what council will be doing very shortly is investing about $750,000 to bring some of those services, including the spas and the toddler pool and whatnot, back online. The airport upgrade, hopefully most of you have had a chance to see the new terminal. It's a great facility. It's good to have that now servicing our city and our region. and as we speak, the airside works is underway. The 3-year program of road renewal had a significant investment over the last 3 years in rejuvenating and resurfacing a number of the roads around our city. And the bottom right-hand corner is a good example of that. Next slide, please. But it's not all about infrastructure and hard assets. It's also about our investment in the programs and services to support our community. So, you know, through whether it's public art, through youth initiatives like the Star Club initiative, through Crime Stoppers initiative in conjunction with Crime Stoppers and SAPOL, or whether it's youth employment opportunities. I'm actually really proud that within the last few months, Council has taken on 5 new trainees, all youth employment opportunities for locals. And as it happens, 3 of those trainees are also Indigenous, which is, I think, a good thing, given that about 5% of our population are Indigenous. Next slide. So if we then start talking about the future, a lot of people are still grappling with what is hydrogen, why is it significant to us, and what does it mean for our future? Some of you will be aware that we had the Federal Minister, Angus Taylor, in the city on Friday. Did anyone hear about that? So on Friday, the Federal Minister was in town to confirm a $70 million Commonwealth Government grant for the Port Bonython Hydrogen Hub facility. That $70 million, together with the state government's commitment during the last state government election of a $593 million hydrogen power station, and in conjunction with the 7 private sector companies that have been working with the state governments and former state governments for the last I'll say 12 months around the development of Port Bonython as a hydrogen hub. Those private sector companies will invest billions of dollars into the hydrogen hub at Port Bonython. So what is hydrogen? I'll just very briefly. Hydrogen obviously is a common chemical that's part of, you know, water, H2O, and other things. But what hydrogen does is it enables the ability to produce, store, transport energy, and particularly renewable energy. And what we're excited about in terms of the hydrogen hub at Port Bonython is that it will deliver significant economic benefits to our city. So when you talk about billions of dollars worth of private sector investment coming into our city, that clearly will then flow into other development within our city. It will deliver social outcomes in terms of improved livability, amenity of our city. And importantly, it enables the decarbonisation of heavy industry. Again, big words, what does that mean? It means that those industries that use a lot of energy at present, you know, burning fossil fuels such as diesel or the like, or using electricity, instead of using those fossil fuels, in future they'll actually be using renewable energy, wind and solar in particular, and hydrogen to run their operations. So instead of having all the carbon emissions that we get from heavy industry, which is obviously at the core of our being in Whyalla with the steelworks and the mining, in future there will be what's called net zero or no or low carbon emissions from those operations. What it will also mean is that other businesses will be attracted to this area with a combination of the ability to access cheap energy, be able to access water. And I know what will become topical. I'm sure there'll be a question come up today around desalination, but desalination is a thing of the future for our region. We're currently reliant on the Murray River and now an aging pipeline that provides all the water for our city. So there's a vulnerability for our city in terms of water supply. So there will be a desal plant built somewhere in the future. So Whyalla potentially will have cheap power, cheap water. We've got good access to land, and we've got all of the existing facilities such as jetty, deep sea ports, railroad, and the like. So Yes, there's an exciting opportunity to bring new industry and new jobs into our city and diversify our economy. Again, one of Wyler's part of the Wyler's history is that we've obviously been very much seen as a one-horse town with the steelworks in particular, but GFB more broadly with the mining operations as well. This will bring a whole new industry and other businesses into our city. Next slide. So why is that important? And looking at sort of the challenges going forward. Why that is, hydrogen in particular is important is that back in the 70s, when the city was actually built, it was designed by BHP and built in the day to actually provide a city to support a much larger population, probably 40, 50, maybe 60,000 people. So a lot of the infrastructure that we've got, if you drive down all of the major roadways that go for our city, you got dual lanes both directions. You've got huge median strips. You've got curbs and gutters, footpaths, and the like. So the city was designed for a much larger population. But over the last 3 decades, our population has been around 21, 22,000. So that's presented the council a real challenge because we've been seeking for our community to essentially maintain an asset base that was designed for a much larger population. So with the hydrogen industry opportunity before us, we do expect that the population will increase. I believe it's not a question of if it will happen, it's when it will happen. But the challenge for council and the community is that we've got to go from our current paradigm as the world as we know it and the city as we know it now to what the city could look like in, say, 10 years' time, noting that hydrogen investment, part of the reason for the federal government's funding of that 70 million was to fast track Australia's uptake of renewable energy and particularly hydrogen. So they're talking about probably a window of 2 to 8 years is where a lot of that construction will occur. Construction itself will bring thousands of people into the city during the construction phase. And based on the economic modelling that the state government did that was put to the federal government, there's probably close to 1,000 ongoing jobs associated with hydrogen. Even if you did the sensitivity analysis and you think, well, maybe that won't all happen, even if you divide some of those numbers by 2, we're still talking about thousands of new jobs in our city. And obviously, we need to transition to an environment where we've got those people living in our city. Next slide. So that presents the challenge. How do we go about activating our city? How do we secure the water that we need, not only for industry, but for community? Water is important for our city in terms of being able to green the city and make it more livable and more amenity. How do we fund the investment in sporting hubs and community hubs across the city? You all know that we've got a number of sporting hubs sort of sprinkled across our city. So we've got some out at Jubilee, we've got some at Memorial, we've got some at Bennett, and we've got tennis courts and things in between. New high school has got sporting facilities behind. What does the future look like? Do we continue to put money into those existing facilities, or do we start to look at trying to create a sporting hub maybe in the centre of town? Because some of the feedback that council gets in relation to Jubilee is that it's not easily accessible by all of our community. It's a little bit dislocated from the rest of the city. And if you look at things like Adelaide Oval, part of the reason for the Adelaide Oval development was to actually bring people into the city as opposed to sending them to the burbs out to West Lakes. And I think everyone acknowledges and recognises the transformation that bringing sporting facilities into the centre of the city has had for metropolitan Adelaide. Community hubs and community buildings. Council has probably about 30 or 40 buildings that we look after ourselves. And then on council or community-owned land, we've probably got close to 60 buildings that are owned by different community groups, largely not-for-profit groups that don't have a significant income stream. and with limited capacity to renew and upgrade their facilities over time. So as a collective, as a city, we need to think about how do we rejuvenate some of the buildings and create the spaces and places that we want for our future. And clearly housing is in the mix in terms of a key challenge for us. We know, speaking to the business community, that we already struggle to get skilled workforce to come and live and work in Whyalla. And the main reason cited for that is the lack of suitable and affordable accommodation needed to support people coming to Whyalla to live. So we've been actively talking to both the federal and state government about how do we start to stimulate some major housing development within our city, because there's no doubt that we're going to need some new housing stock to support an increasing population in the future. Next slide, please. So ultimately, and for those that were here last year, you'll hear some of the same commentary I provided last year. Council's focus is very much around the livability of our city. To be honest, it's no good the state and federal government and private sector putting millions of dollars or billions of dollars into a hydrogen hub if no one wants to come and work in the region. So our pitch to the federal and state government is that whilst there has been a clear focus in the first instance in investing in the hard infrastructure at Port Penithan around standing up the new industry, we need the commensurate amount of investment in the urban renewal of our city, so that we've got a city where people actually need to come and live. We know that there's already jobs here at present that are vacant, and that's prior to the tsunami of new jobs that will come in. So council's focus has been very much on looking at how we maintain and improve the livability of our city. Next slide. Why is that important? Right across Australia, we know that in regional locations, maintaining the depth, breadth and skills of occupations within regional locations is becoming more and more challenging. And as you have populations that are in decline, and if you look at the Eyre Peninsula region that we sit within, probably leaving aside Port Lincoln, the rest of the regional towns within the Eyre Peninsula are all struggling to get the GPs. Next slide. The GPs, the nurses, the architects, the anaesthetists to want to come and live in region. Not that long ago, might have been about this time last year, we had Kindred Living actually close a 53-bed facility, and the main reason cited for that was that they couldn't attract the registered nurses to actually provide that service. So livability is really important, and that is what council's focus is going forward. Next slide. And we're not the first to do this. There's plenty of case studies and examples elsewhere. Newcastle not that long ago had some similar challenges to what Whyalla has got. And I don't know if anyone's been to Newcastle in recent times, but there has been a transformation in Newcastle. So the challenge for us is to say, what is our bold vision? How do we want to revitalise the city? What do we need as a community going forward, in addition to what we've already got? Next slide. So then it's all very well to talk about the vision, but you then have to say, well, how do we fund the ongoing services that we already provide, as well as the renewal of our city going forward? A couple of slides. Again, these are the same as what was presented last year for those that were here. Top left-hand side shows that the rates paid per resident in Whyalla is actually pretty comparable, if not actually quite good compared to a number of other locations. One exception being Mount Gambier, that's got the district of grant wrapped around it. Not this grant. So they've got a slightly different context, but you'll see that in relative terms, our residents pay per resident pay a reasonable amount. Source of funds, that shows, particularly the blue line across the top, shows the percentage of income from residential ratepayers. For Whyalla, I think it's 74% of our rates or thereabouts. 64% of our rate revenue comes from residents, which is lower than a number of other councils, and we are, in relative terms, more reliant on the financial assistance grants that come from the Commonwealth to make up that difference. And when we then talk about the funding that council receives from the Commonwealth, the slide on the right-hand side shows the relative tax take, the three levels of government take. So councils collectively right across Australia collect about 3% of the taxation revenue in the country in the form of rates. At the other end of the spectrum, the Commonwealth collects in excess of 80% through things like income tax, FBT, GST and the like. There is then some handing back to both the state governments and the local councils from the federal government to support the assets that we maintain. And quite interestingly for a lot of people, councils across Australia maintain about 34% of the total public assets in the country compared to the federal government, which includes the likes of defence and those sorts of assets, which is less than 20%. So we're very asset intensive, but income poor from a taxation perspective. The other key thing to mention is that in recent times, albeit over a number of years, but not in the last year or so, the financial assistance grants that we've been getting from the federal government have not been indexed for CPI. So in real terms, the amount that we've been getting from the federal government has actually been declining, and consequently, all other things being equal, that would mean that ratepayers need to contribute more. So fortunately, in the last 12 months or so, the federal government have started to return to indexing the financial assistance grants, but we'll have to wait and see whether that's an ongoing thing or not. Next slide. So we then, left-hand slides provides a little bit of an indication for every $100 of taxes or rates that council collects, where we spend it. That previous chart that we listed probably provides a more definitive listing. But on the right-hand side, we look at what is the makeup of council's rates. So we base our long-term financial plan and our assumptions on having CPI plus 1.6%, with the 1.6% being a makeup or a contribution to the additional costs of delivering local government services compared to the basket of goods that sits within the CPI. So whilst the CPI, most people recognise and understand, local government costs are going up much faster than the CPI. And our experience, particularly through COVID, is that it's costing us sort of 20 to 25% more to engage the contractors and to do the work than we were paying before. So our costs are going up much more. We've also got a modest contribution to projects. So that 1% is what goes into things like the Foreshore Master Plan, what goes into the Northern Coastline, what goes into airport upgrades and the like. So that's the projects over and above the business as usual. It's a contribution to the repayment of loans over time and some deferred increases from previous years. So our draft annual business plan and our long-term financial plan was premised on CPI plus 1.6%. Next slide. And at the time, maybe go to the next slide. Come back one more. At the time that we prepared the draft budget, we had an assumption that CPI would increase by 3.3%. 3.3%. So 3.3 plus 1.6. Our draft budget, as it's being presented to you now and as it stands, is based on a rate increase of 4.9%, which for the average residential ratepayer is about a $64 increase per annum or $1.17 per week increase. Part of the challenge that we now have, the royal we, council, our community and everyone else, is that the CPI isn't 3.3. The recent announcement for SA is that our CPI now is 4.7. And I have to say that I haven't been near a radio all day, what did the Reserve Bank do today in terms of interest rates?
0.25%.
Okay, so 0.25 was it?
Yep.
Yeah. So CPI is one challenge itself, but there's going to be some knock-on effects, including interest rates. So clearly the cost of delivering council services is going to increase. So again, using our fundamental principles of CPI plus 1.6, we would then be looking at an increase of 6.3. Council has not made a decision and has not had a robust discussion about what the rates will be for next year, because all of this is hot off the press, including today's RBA announcements. So we part of the questioning that when we get to the end of this session is we want to get feedback from the community in terms of what your views are in terms of what council should rate, because as I'm about to explain, if we don't collect at least CPI through our rates, essentially we go backwards, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Can we go back a couple of slides? All right. So just some historic information in terms of rate rises versus CPI. So top graph shows the CPI movements versus rates. Bottom left-hand side, we have been aiming for over a period of time to try and get that 1.6 or 1.9% above CPI. It was originally 1.9, but we've dropped that back to 1.6 because the federal government has started to index. So prior to them, federal government bringing indexation back in, we had about 0.3 for that. And I think another key thing to note is that when council adopts its budget each year and the annual business plan, it needs to have regards to not only the capacity and the contribution that the current ratepayers provide, it also has to have regards to the future population. So there's always potentially a temptation of saying, kicking the can down the line and saying, well, we'll have a rate freeze or we'll have a low rate rise now. But for every 1% in the current year, the financial implications of that for council over a 10-year period represents $2.1 million. Next slide, please. The very hard, stark reality in front of the council at present is that based on our draft annual business plan and the assumption of a 4.9% increase, council has been running at an operating deficit for a number of years. And over the 10-year period, we are projecting that we will continue to run an operating deficit over that 10-year period. In simple terms, that is not financially sustainable. In simple terms, we cannot continue to do that because essentially all we're doing is we're actually increasing the indebtedness for future population, and it's to be honest, financially irresponsible to continue to run operating deficits. The bottom left-hand line shows that we have made a number of adjustments to the draft annual business plan through a number of initiatives to try and address that financial shortfall we've got in terms of our making ends meet. So the orange line was the original long-term financial plan adopted by council, and the blue line is the adjustments that we've made. So you can see that we started to change the trajectory of our operations going forward. On the right-hand side shows what our level of debt as a council and a city is, both original and adopted. Again, maybe next slide. Oh, one more. Again, the draft annual business plan was based on an assumption of 3.3 CPI and a rate rise of 4.6. If we continue to run with that, now that CPI has increased, what that will represent is a deterioration of our financial position as represented in the red line. So we'll go backwards in terms of we'll have larger operating deficits over the 10-year period, and we'll end up with more debt as a city and a community going forward if we don't do anything. If we adjust the rates to account for the CPI movement and go to 6.3%, what we'll arrive at is the purple line. Obviously a much better position over that 10-year period, but still an operating deficit. You might say, why is council considering to continue to maintain an operating deficit? And the short answer to that is that we know that there's going to be a shift in our reality from what we know now to what will be here in 10 years' time. With the investment that's coming in, we know that there's going to be significant investments in the city. We know there's going to be more jobs. We know there's going to be a stimulation of the housing sector. Property values will go up. New development will come online. So we know that all these things are coming, but we're not able to predict when and what quantum that will be at this point in time. And one of the things that council is doing at present, particularly through the federal government election and beyond the federal government election, is that we're driving really hard with the federal government, state government, and in turn we'll look to get the private sector also engaged in what we're calling a regional city deal. So the federal government's got some money that they call regional deals, and what we want to do is to say that if the federal government and state government wants hydrogen to be a successful industry going forward, and if we want to start addressing the fundamental challenge that we've got, that we're a city state at present, and once you get outside of Metro Adelaide, the regional towns and localities and cities are very small. If we're going to break that, we need to have a significant investment in our city, and we know that our community, our current ratepayers, don't have the financial capacity to invest in the urban renewal of our city. So again, there's no guarantee that will secure that, but at this point in time, the council is of the view that we hold the line in terms of our finances. We need to at least try to keep covering the cost of delivering the services, the existing services, and then in time, we trust and hope and believe that we'll be able to secure some significant investment in our city going forward. Next slide. So again, the challenge ultimately for particularly the elected member group who make the decision, but collectively our community, is to think like a community, not like an individual. And what's behind that is that some people can potentially say, well, I don't use a childcare service, so I don't want my rates to go to a childcare service, just as an example. People will have particular passions or interests in life, and they'll be interested in certain things, whether it's aged care or whether it's youth services. So each person within our community will have their own views and their own opinions based on their own lived experience. We need to collectively put our arms around that and think about what is the best for our city and our community going forward. Next slide. But acknowledging clearly that we know that a lot of people within our community are doing it tough. We know that we have many people in our community who are either unemployed or underemployed. We know where we've got a lot of people on disabilities or social pensions. We know we've got an ageing demographic. So we know that our community's got limited capacity and some people are doing it tough. So as you would expect, council has a number of rate relief options for eligible persons, the ability for postponements of rates for seniors, the ability to set up flexible payment arrangements and work with individual ratepayers and connect them with financial counsellors to try and help them through the process in terms of being able to make their contribution going forward. Next slide. I think this is the last slide. Consultation process. So tonight is the, I suppose, the kickoff of the public engagement. Information's gone onto our website. We do want people to provide feedback, be it in person now, and we'll capture the comments and views. We've got a feedback form we'd encourage you to fill in, or you can send an email to council. There on the 16th of May, at the council meeting, any member from the community or any interested stakeholder can come and make a verbal submission to council regarding the draft annual business plan. We'll have a second meeting such as this on Tuesday the 17th. So if you, off the back of tonight, go away and think about things and come up with some other questions or comments or ideas or suggestions, you can come back, or alternatively, if you have family or friends that couldn't come tonight, encourage them to come along and access that information. The plan at this point in time is that council will collate all of that feedback, and we're genuine in terms of wanting to hear what the community says. And last year we can point to the fact that the final decision by council, I think, reflected a lot of the feedback that we got in terms of the annual business plan. So on the 30th of May, council will, at a special council meeting, will look at all the feedback that we've received over this period, and they'll give us essentially the final writing or instructions in terms of what to bring back in terms of the final annual business and budget to be adopted at the June council meeting. Next slide, which I think is the end of me talking and opening it up to the floor. So I'll start with the first question, which is there any questions or feedback in relation to the information that's been provided tonight? We'll then talk about, what does the future of Whyalla look like and what do you want to see going forward? And then probably the key thing that everyone will have a view on, I'm sure, is what is a reasonable and appropriate rate increase given the context that we find ourselves in at present. So I'll start with the first question. Yes?
Are you aware that Hindenburg ran on hydrogen? How are we going to transport it?
Yep.
You're going to create hydrogen.
Yep.
Yeah. It is a sensible question.
Yeah, no, it is. No, it's a very sensible question. I appreciate it. So what is being proposed at Port Bonython is both the production of hydrogen for both domestic use, noting that particularly the steelworks wants to be able to access hydrogen to be able to create green steel. It will also be produced in order to run power stations, produce electricity for the state and potentially beyond. And it's also being produced for the purpose of exporting. And when it comes to transport, there's a lot of good minds around the world currently looking at how do you transport hydrogen. It can be transported in using a number of different modes and in a number of different forms. The most likely scenario, and I'm not an expert in this regard, is that it will likely to be exported in the form of ammonia, which is like fertilizer, which is already currently transported all around the world. And at the other end, that fertilizer then will be split to pull the hydrogen out. As one example, green steel in itself is another way of capturing and embodying that green energy into a product. So I think you'll see more steel exports in the future, and then there's other means by which it can be generated as well. If you're interested, after the event, I'm happy to give you a link to a podcast that actually talks about that. And the reality is that it's early days for hydrogen, but the world, I emphasize the world, has embraced hydrogen as a future energy source. So you've got likes of Japan, Korea, Rotterdam in Europe, Germany, all looking at using hydrogen in things like heavy vehicles, trains, planes, trucks, buses in particular. Maybe domestic commercial vehicles maybe a little bit further down the track. But yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is that there's many answers to that question, and it will come down to the circumstances for each country and each locality as to how best they can use and transport hydrogen going forward.
You're talking about transport, but I didn't really get an answer for that. Is there any shipping involved in this?
Look, shipping hydrogen in a liquid or gas form is very expensive at present and not economically viable. Having said that, the Japanese have built a vessel specifically tailor-made for the purpose of transporting liquid hydrogen. But that's not what the future is likely to be, because it's too expensive. So I think you'll find that hydrogen will be exported in different forms. it will be exported invariably through the ships and the ports. I've got no doubt about that. So Port Bonython, the state government's already committed the investment to upgrading the Port Bonython Santos jetty to enable it or facilitate it being able to load ships in future with hydrogen in whatever format that may be. Again, there's work happening behind the scenes which I'm not privy to at present. So certainly ports and shipping for external purposes. Last night I was reading that the Germans are actually looking at fueling their rail system with hydrogen and actually using specially modified rail carts to transport hydrogen in a particular form. Again, that's what they're doing. So rail and road could be a possibility as well.
In this case, what is Perry still in the race for hydrogen, as was originally proposed? Yeah.
Short answer is no. Perry are looking at hydrogen and in particular New Star. So New Star are looking for hydrogen, but as I understand, their interest in hydrogen is more about accessing the water as opposed to the hydrogen in terms of the energy. So the hydrogen opportunity for them, I think, is more of a byproduct. There has been some discussion because the media talks about, hydrogen hubs. The fact that we've got federal government and state government investment in Port Bonython confirms that Whyalla is the designated regional hub for hydrogen production in this state. The federal government is unlikely to put money into a plethora of other hubs within the state. The funding rounds that they released late last year, they had two streams. One was for implementation, and one was for design and development. They went to Australia at large and said, if you want to produce, use, or transport hydrogen, put in your bids. And these funds are to fast track Australia's capability in terms of standing up hydrogen as a future fuel source. There is no doubt that there will be a hub, at least one hub in a number of states. So Gladstone in Queensland, there will be one in Western Australia, I've got no doubt about it, one in Victoria and Tasmania. So there will be designated hubs, one hub in each state, but hydrogen will become more and more mainstream over time. So you'll have more and more companies or businesses investing in hydrogen. And the reality is that for Australia, whatever hydrogen we can produce as a country, the world demand for that hydrogen is probably 15 or 20 times now, and it's only exponentially going to get larger. So the more hydrogen we can produce, the more exports that we can do. So there is no ceiling in terms of what the opportunity is in terms of hydrogen as an export going forward.
Well, I think from what I've read and seen, Port Perry's in a similar sort of situation to ourselves. Like I said, a one-horse race. Mm-hmm. They're looking for investment all the time. And, it's getting from stage Port Augusta as well. Mm-hmm. At least Port Augusta seems to be going ahead on their own bat, but they've got some significant lobby in the South Australian government to perhaps try for it.
Yeah. So as I said, I think New Star, there will be some sort of hydrogen development specifically servicing New Star. But in terms of federal and ongoing state government funding, I can't see the federal government doing it. The state might put some more money into Perry, but the designated regional hydrogen hub for South Australia has now been cemented as Whyalla. Which is a big deal for some of the reasons we talked about. That is huge for our city. If you think about the investment back done in when BHP first set up the town, particularly when the steel making was done, go back to Sir Thomas Playford, the investment that went into Whyalla back in when it was first, stood up as a major industrial city. We're now looking at the next evolution or era for Whyalla, where we're moving now from the focus on mineral resources to renewable resources. And we're talking very much about Whyalla, but what was traditionally known as the iron triangle, I keep dropping it out there. Someday someone smart will pick it up and it will get some traction. But I think we're moving from the iron triangle to the green triangle. Anyone who's driven through Port Augusta and look at those huge, huge wind farm that they've got there. There's major solar development proposed there. The Coltana solar farm that was pressed, that GFG pressed pause on, I've lost track of time, 14 months, 12 months ago, when Gupta was having his financial troubles, they pressed pause on that. That's now coming back online. It's about to happen. So we're going to have huge solar development here. Clearly, there's already been investment in winds, and hydrogen's the next evolution of the investment in renewable energy. And the podcast, and again, I emphasise I'm not an expert. The podcast that I'm happy to share with you talks about the fact that one of the things that hydrogen does is it addresses the variability associated with renewable energy. So, when it's windy, you get wind, and when it's sunny, you get solar energy. Hydrogen is the means by which you can actually capture that energy, store it, and then reuse it at a later time. So it's the sort of the renewable that brings all the renewables together in terms of shoring up our future energy sources. And the sweet thing is that the Iron Triangle generally, but the Eyre Peninsula as well, we're in the sweet spot in terms of we get lots of wind and we get lots of sun in this part of the world, and then coupled with the fact that we've got a lot of the infrastructure and key users of the energy. There's been a number of solar farms proposed around this area for some time that haven't got off the ground, and the main reason that some of those major solar developments haven't occurred is that they haven't had the demand or the users of the electricity. You then start talking about building a power plant, and you start talking about green energy, and you start talking about other manufacturing and other businesses that will potentially be drawn to our city. All of a sudden, it becomes economically viable to bring that solar development online because it can now, be captured and used in the form of hydrogen.
You might have missed it, but what's the timeline on this?
Yeah, my sense, and I say sense because ultimately, council's on the boundary line, watching a lot of what other people and other entities are doing. My sense is that we're probably looking at the commencement of construction around 2 to 3 years. It will then ramp up, I'm thinking, between probably about year 3 to about year 6 or 7. It will plateau a little bit, but will continue through to probably about year 10, and then I think we'll then start to see a decline. So we're talking about a 10-year window where a lot is going to happen. Am I confident that it's going to happen? When you get the federal government, both sides of politics, as well as Greens and Independents, supporting hydrogen, coupled with the state government, and unbeknownst to a lot of people in our community, the former state government has been through a competitive process. They've been to market, they've shortlisted 7 proponents, they've been in detailed negotiations, discussions with those 7 companies, multinational and national companies of significance, going from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries through to Fortescue Futures, so Twiggy Forrest, Origin, Santos, H2U, AMP Energy, major multinational energy provider. So you're talking about significant multinationals that are doing this sort of investment right around the world. They're major players, heavy lifters, and they're committed to Port Bonython. So it's no longer a question of if it will happen. To your point, it's a question of when will this happen. 10 years in the context of the evolution of a city is not a long time. That's why we've got this uncomfortable period that we need to work through as a council. I'm an accountant by background. my frank and fearless advice to council, any council that I work for, is that you cannot continue to maintain an unfinancially sustainable operating scenario. It's irresponsible. I'll say that as a professional, but the advice that we've provided to the council is that it would, coming back to that question, if council wanted to address the fact that it's financially unsustainable at this point in time, the two key levers that it can pull is it can either increase rates, which we know the community's got a limited capacity and probably tolerance to accept, or it can reduce services and cut services and reduce its spend. The question for the community is this now the time, right here, right now, to be looking at cutting services, shutting facilities down, reducing our investment in our city and the amenity of our city, at the same time that we're trying to encourage people to come and live in our city. We're trying to encourage and support major private sector investment in our city and the urban renewal of our city. Does it make sense at this point in time to pull that lever? The advice and view is that now's not the right time to be looking to, cut and burn or slash and burn service levels and council spend when we've got, this narrative about what the future holds. So we're holding the line. The budget is primarily based on a business as usual, as I said. Very small contribution to projects, so the equivalent of about 1% in rate revenue for things such as offshore master plans and coastlines and things like that. The rest is essentially the core services that council has been providing and is planning to continue to provide. The community says, no, we're not prepared to pay 6.3, we can't afford it. Council, no, you need to cut something. Well, then we'll have that conversation. But as I said, the view at present is that we shouldn't be looking at cutting our services. We already know that a lot of people drive in and drive out from this city as opposed to living here. So we really want the investment in our city to encourage people to come and want to live in Whyalla. Move out of Adelaide or from interstate, come and live in a regional location such as Whyalla.
Why would they do that?
Why wouldn't they?
Because there's no amenities here, or less every week go by.
Yeah.
And the amenities that you're talking about are very limited. You're talking about a cuttlefish coast. Well, cuttlefish are only here for a short time. Yeah. And that's assuming the animals that eat them. Yeah. Let them go. Yeah. And then you've got the tourists coming down to the launching ramp. And wanting to play with the dolphins. Yeah. These are all things that can change overnight. Yeah. Yeah. But
when we're talking about the amenity of the city and what would attract people to come and live in Whyalla, are people going to want to come and live in Whyalla because we got the cuttlefish? Or are they going to come and live in Whyalla because they've got contemporary sport and rec facilities? They've got good quality community hubs. They've got fantastic open spaces. They've got a green city with lots of trees and beautiful meeting strips. They've got access to the doctors, nurses, architects, and the like, the professional people, and delivering services that people want to be able to access. At present, we all know that because we're such a city state, you want something. Typically, you have to get it from Adelaide. Typically, not always, but we want to encourage the skilled workforce of the future to come and live in places like Whyalla. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be a destination of choice for people to come and live. But what sits between us now and that future paradigm is the urban renewal of our city. We need the new rec centre. We need a rejuvenation of our main streets. We need improved community facilities. A lot of the buildings that we've got sprinkled across our city are small, tired, single-use facilities. And when I say single-use, you've got one community group using the buildings maybe 2 or 3 nights a week. And we've got lots of buildings like that. And those community groups don't have the capacity to renew or upgrade those facilities. A lot of them are running on volunteers. We know volunteerism is going down. there's so many examples that we can quote where the current paradigm we're in is a product of where we've come from, and what we need to do is work out how do we transition from what we've got now to what the future could be. And I don't want to stand in front of you and sound like a salesperson and say, you know, like a you know, a GFG or Gupta and say, you know, there's going to be $1 billion investment in the city and there's going to be a in the steelworks, and there's going to be a transformation. I'm being pragmatic and realistic in terms of what I think the vision and the future of the city will be. And with federal and state government and private sector investment already committed to our city, it's not an if, it's already committed. The trick for us now is how do we take that investment in the hard infrastructure and get the soft and community and social infrastructure in our city to encourage people to come and live here and work in those facilities going forward. Yep.
Do you see all of these things happening? Is it going to change the standard of people living? At the moment, we've got about 30 or 40% of the population. If steelworks closed down, it wouldn't make a 1 iota of difference to them. Their futures, they basically live from week to week, not talking financially.
Yeah.
They've got no, they don't see themselves as having any future, but there is a future out there for them.
Yeah.
And this welfare mentality that is overtaken, it's got to be stopped.
Yeah.
The associated crime, the drug problems. Council's got a duty to speak to these bodies, like the police, whatever, to sort this out. Because when you read on Facebook, now the general tone of people's complaints, well, a lot of people think that if you live out the other side of our Stewart Avenue, you're sort of swimming in. But there are some really good people that live in Wireless Stewart. I'm not talking about the Jennings areas, and I'm talking about the Perkins Street, Patton Street, Rockwood. No offence to anybody here that lives in any of those streets, but there are really good people there, and kids getting up to about 10 or 12 years of age, they're slipping into that mold. And it's only the smart ones or the parents that are trying to give them a future. But so sad. There are so many families disintegrating and heading down the education opportunities that we find here.
Like, it's a really good question, Jeff, and I think over time there will be a change in the demographics in the city, but that invariably will take a long time. That's the sort of thing that doesn't happen overnight. I think with the investment in some of the facilities, services and programs, I think we can start to make some inroads, into some of that, some of those socio-economic challenges that we've got in the city at present. The Weiler High School, or Weiler Secondary College, I should say, that is a fantastic investment in our city. And there will be some people that say, well, no, we're actually happy with our own high school, and we want 3 high schools, we don't want 1. But we've got a contemporary, state-of-the-art high school facility now in our city that is as good as what you get in Metro Adelaide. So when I talk about the urban renewal of our city, that is an example where there's been an investment in this case, secondary education, a building, and the same architects and builders that built the Botanic High School right in the middle of CBD Adelaide did the Wireless Secondary College. They didn't skimp in terms of materials, design, functionality. Our school is as good as what you'd get in Adelaide now. That's got to be a great thing for some of our younger people coming through education. We're blessed at present that we also have a university. I'll say a TAFE college, but I'll admit very quickly that I haven't heard a lot of positive commentary about the TAFE college, but I think there's certainly some opportunity to improve. But you've got a world-class, state-of-the-art high school sitting right next to a university campus and a TAFE campus. We know that both the university and TAFE, those two institutions, as well as the University of Adelaide, so University of Adelaide is the lead university for what's called the HILT CRC. So HILT stands for Heavy Industry Low Carbon Transition. CRC, Collaborative Research Centre. So again, I've lost track of time. Time keeps marching on. 12 months ago, the federal government committed $39 million to the HILT CRC and stood the HILT CRC up. It's a collaborative research centre with universities, industry, applications, technology providers right around Australia doing work focused solely on how to transition heavy industry to a low carbon future, with hydrogen being at the centre of that. University of SA led that submission and they're the lead entity for that organisation. That submission focused on establishing regional hydrogen hubs. Join the dots. That regional hydrogen hub now has been confirmed as in Whyalla. So that university, 5 other universities around Australia, all of the industry right around Australia, so the Twiggy Forest and the GFGs and all the people up in Gladstone, all talking about how to produce, use, transport, and hydrogen of the future. All those smart brains are now focused on hydrogen and renewable energy, and part of that, the work that they're doing also is looking at what is the skilled workforce required for that future industry. What are the skills, knowledge, experience people need to work using hydrogen? There's jobs that, some jobs already exist and it's just a transition, but there's a whole heap of new jobs that will be developed because of hydrogen and the emerging technology. And if you think about solar, just as an analogy, solar's been with us for some time. Again, the podcast that I referred to, the solar panels were originally developed by NASA as part of their astronautical expeditions. Cost them $40,000 something per panel. These days, those panels can be produced for 4 cents. Just about a third, I'm not sure what the number is, I'll say a third of the households in South Australia have got a solar panel on their roof. The largest generator of electricity in our state is rooftop solar. So solar's been with us for some time and it's evolved, and as technology evolves, the cost goes down. The same expectations are with hydrogen. So, sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but the question is, will there be a change in terms of the demographics, and how can we tackle some of those challenges that we have within our community? I think the new investment, the new services, the programs, the fact that we're trying to position Whyalla really as the hub. So instead of everyone having to go to Adelaide for just about every second thing that they need, for the whole of the Eyre Peninsula and to the west of the border, why would you go to Adelaide when you can come to Whyalla instead? What's that? No barnacles? No bunnies. Think about little Johnny. Family's got a farm near Cleve. Does that family send little Johnny to Adelaide for school, high school or secondary? So, do you send little Johnny to a PAC or St. Peter's in Adelaide, which is a 5.5, 6 hour drive, or do you send little Johnny to Whyalla, given that we've got now a Whyalla Secondary College that is as good as what you can get in Adelaide, which is only an hour and a half drive down the road? Aged care. We know that we need an investment in aged care facilities in this city. And we all know that we want to keep our elderly in our city as opposed to having to send them elsewhere. So the private sector investment and the urban renewal will bring online some of those things. And whilst some communities or some members of our community may be unemployed, may not be that interested in what may happen 10 or 15 years down the track, what we do know is that at some stage they're going to want aged care facilities, and I'd rather have those provided in Whyalla than them having to go somewhere else. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
I came here 46 years ago, and there were 5 resident conditions. Luckily, unluckily, I crushed my hand, and it wasn't for the guy that lived here. I packed them, put it back together for me. That was before flying doctor, was before the air ambulance. The guy that organised that, he did that because his daughter died, and if they had an ambulance, she would have lived. But we had these 5 people. There's an eye specialist, the 3 general surgeons, and somebody else. That was interesting. Something happens to you in Royal, you'll fly down there. Care of the Royal Flying.
Yeah.
That is that's a treasure.
Yeah.
We've got a good hospital.
Yep.
But if there's anything seriously wrong with you.
Yeah. But that's a product of the inherent challenge that we've got as a state, that we're so metro focused. And unfortunately, it's a 2-tiered state, Metro Adelaide and everything else. And we're clearly in everything else. Our proposition to the state government is, does it make sense that, using that example, every time someone gets a serious illness, they have to go to Adelaide to get treatment? Why is it that our hospital is not a major teaching hospital in the region? We know, speaking to the University of SA, that 75% of the students that study in region stay in region. Come back to little Johnny from Cleve, comes to Whyalla Secondary College, is interested in doing engineering. Why can't little Johnny do the first year of engineering at the university campus in Adelaide? Sorry, in Whyalla. They may need to go to Adelaide for years 2 through to 4, but importantly, that last year, 5th year, when they need to do a placement, if little Johnny comes back to Whyalla to do that 5th year of his university studies, what's the likelihood that little Johnny's going to actually stay in region? What's the likelihood that little Johnny's going to want to buy a house and have a family in the region as opposed to going back to Adelaide? That's the part of the wicked problem that we're trying to tackle through this regional city deal, that we really, as a state, need to get an investment in regional cities of scale. You think about the eastern states of Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. Each of those states have got regional cities of sufficient scale that they're financially sustainable in their own right. They've got a population base that is sustainable, and you can get all the services and the amenity and the livability that you want, in a Bendigo or a Ballarat or a Geelong or a Townsville. In South Australia, once you get outside of Metro Adelaide, where's the equivalent city that we've got in our state? There isn't one yet, but we believe Whyalla should be it. And I also have the view that this is the personal vision or objective of Justin, that Whyalla should be the largest city outside of Metro Adelaide. We should be larger than Mount Gambier. Yep, and I think we will. Yep. No, second. If you leave Murray Bridge to one side. Oh, that's Metro Adelaide now. That's Metro. Yeah. Yeah. So my view is that Whyalla should, over time, become the largest city outside Metro Adelaide for all the reasons that we've been talking about tonight. But that will take some time. But that's where I think we're headed. And obviously, in the short term, we need to work through what does that mean in terms of our current services and service delivery, and ultimately rates. Okay, any other questions from anyone or comments?
As a matter of interest, have you tried to buy a suit in Whyalla anytime recently?
No.
You know something you can't. Now, this is
Yeah.
something you want to develop.
Yeah.
As a bit of a hub.
Mm-hmm.
You can't even buy a suit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you go for your suit?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anywhere to here.
Yeah.
And now that,
Yeah.
I just mentioned that as one example.
Yeah.
But there's many others now.
Yeah.
Where things that were readily available.
Yeah.
no longer.
Yeah. Yep. Look, I accept that, and I fully acknowledge that, you know, we've got, this really uncomfortable period in front of us, in terms of, you know, waiting for the investment and the urban renewal to occur and the population to increase. That won't happen overnight. We acknowledge that, but, you know, I am confident. I'm 98% confident, 99 now, that the federal government has committed the 70 mil. If we can get through the next period of time, a commitment from the state and federal government to come to the table and to work with the council about a regional deal, where the reason why we're pitching that is that we don't want to go and talk about getting a grant for a rec centre or a sports facility, or X, Y, and Z, because our list is very long. What we want to do is get the federal government and state government to acknowledge that if the hydrogen industry is going to be successful, there needs to be an investment in our city, and we want them to come to the table, and we want to have a discussion with them about what is the types of services, facilities, and amenity that is needed in a location such as Whyalla, and let's agree on a program of work. It might be a program that occurs over a 10-year period, but let's get that commitment and the governance structure in place. You know, working with the state government at present, as I have been, and the council has been over the last 18 months. Every time you go to the state government, there's 20 different departments or agencies that you need to talk to, and the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And whilst some government agencies say that regions matter and they have regional development strategies, the cold hard reality is that the machinery of government is focused on metropolitan Adelaide. So the purpose of, in part, for the regional deal is that it actually comes together with a governance framework and a commitment from the federal government, state government, and council to actually work together to co-curate what investment is needed and to co-fund that investment in the city going forward, to unlock the economic, social, and environmental benefits that is of state, national, and significant international significance. What is going to be happening in Port Bonython in 10 years' time is not only important to the state's interest and the national interest, it's of international interest. One of the key proponents as part of the 7 is Mitsubishi Heavy Industry. Japan and Korea, in particular, Singapore, they're all screaming for clean, green energy. And we've got the ability to provide it.
In between time, as a pensioner, I may live that long, may not. But
Yeah.
I have got to deal with my current situation.
Yep.
Which has been pointed out by
Mhm.
scratch,
Mm-hmm.
CPI and all the rest of it.
Yep.
And I might not be able to afford to live
Yeah.
by then.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
So, you know, I haven't had to borrow money for many years.
Yeah.
And your answer, partially answer anyhow, is to defer the rates until the house is sold. Well, by then, if I'm alive and I'm in one of the new homes or whatever, I'm going to need all the money I can get from the value of my home. So really, it's not really doing me any favours. because somewhere on the
Yeah.
line there's going to be
Yeah.
money runs out.
Yep, and I hope I've got that message across already. Council is very sensitive, empathetic, and understanding that many people in our community are struggling already. And if you're following the media at present, things are only going to get tougher with interest rate rises and the like. That slide about thinking like a community, not like an individual, is part of the challenge, because as a council, we have the same sort of challenge that you have as an individual, that we got to try and make ends meet. And at present, even council right now is not making ends meet with our finances. Do we actually make things or allow things to get worse? Or do we, pull one of those two levers that I mentioned before? Or do we hold on and try to get by for a few years and hopefully see, not hopefully, expect to see some of this urban renewal occur? So we understand fully your situation, and unfortunately, right across Australia, there's lots of people in exactly the same boat that you are in, and we're in. Okay, didn't really want to end on a flat spot or a negative, but key messages we understand. We're looking for CPI plus 1.6. So, and that 1.6, we've been trying to be very clear what that's made up of. So there's not a lot of really heady projects, a lot of new initiatives, new services being looked at. It's largely a business as usual budget going forward.
The discussions you have in the state government.
Yeah.
How long do you carry those on? Is there a timeline that you've got in mind that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, no, don't apologise. It is a really interesting question, and we've been extremely proactive in terms of our advocacy and our engagement with the state government for the last 18 months. We've just had a change in state government, so to some extent, it's almost like we're going back 5 steps before we start going forward again. We haven't yet met with the new Premier and new Treasurer and new Minister for Mines and Energy and everything else. We haven't met the new government formally yet. We obviously have had a few informal discussions with them. But the state government, through its own election campaign and its commitment, clearly sees the important role that Whyalla has for this state going forward. Outside of health, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, outside of health and the commitments that were made for health, the commitment for the hydrogen power station, I think, was probably the largest investment that they actually went to the community with as part of their election platform. If you think then about what the state government's interest is in not only hydrogen but Whyalla, given that investment, can make some assumptions that they're going to want to make sure that that investment returns an investment, and that everything that needs to be done to make that investment successful will be done. So I'm expecting that we'll get a good reception from the new state government. The former Liberal government, I think, was they were open to listen, but we didn't see a lot of direct action as a result of our advocacy effort. Albeit, having said that, I've got to give credit where credit's due, in that the former state Liberal government were the ones that were progressing the hydrogen initiative, essentially behind the scenes, for want of a better term. Why they didn't make more of that during the election period still got me beat, because to me, it would have been a fantastic good news story for Whyalla and the region, the Upper Spencer Gulf region, for the Liberal Marshall government to come out and talk about, you know, the fact that they've engaged the 7 companies and what, you know, what the future holds. For some reason, they didn't do that. But we do know that at the federal level, Labor, Liberal, Greens, Independents are all supportive of hydrogen. And given the investment that the Commonwealth's already made and the fact that we've now been confirmed as the regional hydrogen hub for this state, I'd expect that that will unlock other opportunities going forward. Okay, we might stop there. Anyone that wants a copy of that link to the pods, if you got Spotify, I'll give that to you. If you want to have a chat with the council or the staff, just one-on-one, we're happy to hang around for a little bit and talk to you some more. Please fill in the forms either now or take them away and send them back. Please encourage family, friends and others to either jump online or attend the future sessions. My last question for you tonight is I just want to confirm, did you find tonight useful in terms of the form and content of the information? Yep, that's good. So I've done my job for the day, so that's good. Thank you for that. So yeah, it's no good, you know, having someone stand up and talk for forever and you not walk out of the room sort of feeling like you've actually got something from the session. So I appreciate that you've got some.
Comment online if you want to comment on the rates.
Yep, you can either comment online, you can send an email, you can request to come and present at the council meeting on the 16th of May. I think they're the main ways. Yep, or talk to your elected members. Yep. Thanks, everyone.